Thank you, Linda. That was fabulous. And now to share his talk on how we find our way back home with a lesson entitled Get Out of the City of Your Mind and Back to Your True Nature, Dr. Will Keepan.
Thank you. And thank you, Linda, for that beautiful, beautiful song. So in Proverbs, we read, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. As a woman thinketh in her heart, so is she. So our thoughts create our reality at a certain level and are very profound in that regard. The Buddha also said, as we think, so we become. And across the spiritual traditions of the world, thoughts create, and working with thought is a foundational practice in spiritual traditions. And we're going to be looking at that today. And at the same time, thoughts can get in the way and pose as our true self. Thoughts can give us the illusion that we are our thoughts. And in this way, the title of this talk, Get Out of the City of Your Mind and Into Your True Nature, there is a parallel between the way the mind works and the way a city works. If you think about it, we love cities, right? They're wonderful. All their marvelous activities and universities and worship services and parks and museums and all the different kinds of people, things happening all around us. There's a constant buzz, lots of choices about how to spend our time. The mind is similar, constant stream of thoughts coming and going. We can follow any one of the threads of these thoughts, which will lead to other thoughts, and sort of follow this thread and follow the tracks of the mind. And they are kind of infinite and constantly unfolding in myriad different directions. Yet, just as with the city, we all know how important it is to get out of the city at times and get into the beauty of nature. You know, when we leave the city and we come out into this, expansive majesty of the mountains, or this peaceful, babbling brook, and this kind of awe sets in, this awareness of the eternal silence. Most of the world is silence. The cities have a lot of noise and bustle. And if you live in them, then you learn to live with that, and we need to. But when you get out away from the city, you realize, wow, it's so quiet out here. And then you hear all these other sounds that were covered up by the sounds of the city. And when we do that, we move into a state of awe and a kind of natural state of serenity as we commune with the peace, the inherent peace of nature. So it's similar with our mind. It is like a city, and we can easily get chased around, following this thought, following that thought. And then in that way, we are run by our thoughts. And so the whole essence of this talk today is, rather than being run by our thoughts, we want to learn to let our thoughts run by as we stay still. That's the little shift. Instead of being run by our thoughts, let our thoughts run by. Doesn't mean that we don't still work with them or value them, but we don't become them. We don't merge our identity into our thoughts and then cycle around and around the way cars do in city traffic. So this is really key, because just as those subtle sounds of nature, which are really the reality, when you get up in an airplane, you see nature's everywhere. Cities are the exception, right? Cities are little dots. The vast landscape is mostly just this beautiful nature, this natural world. And the still small voice within us can easily get drowned out by the incessant stream of thoughts in the mind. And so it's important to learn how to basically decouple from the constant stream of thoughts and connect with a deeper level of our consciousness, of our awareness, of our being. And so this is not to deny the importance of thought, but it's to not be fully identified with the thought. How can we get into our true nature every day, even while living in the city? And Cynthia's meditation gave us a key hint here, which is that we basically identify with that universal Christ within us, and that we essentially can enter the bustle and hustle of the city and the myriad activities and the constant distractions, centered in this presence of deep love in the heart and compassion. And so we'll be talking about how we can do this. And I want to give you an example, a story. When Cynthia and I were in a prison, teaching in a prison, not in a prison, fortunately, that's not been part of our experience in terms of being an inmate. But we have done quite a bit of work in prisons. And we were at a prison in South Africa, Pollsmoor Prison, which is actually the one where Nelson Mandela was taken after his 18 years on Robben Island prison. So he moved from one prison to another. And in this prison, we were doing our gender equity and reconciliation work, but we began by teaching a simple practice of meditation. And the basic practice was really quite a traditional practice of meditation, where we center ourselves, we decouple our thinking from the mind and descend into the heart. And so we are basically disidentifying with thought and centering ourselves in that awareness of the heart. And in that place, we kind of led them through this guided process and the really basic elementary training of how to connect with this center of consciousness that is deep within, that is indestructible, eternal, free, beyond thought, and deeply connected to the essence of who we actually are. And in that place, and from within that place, we spoke about how in this place you are free. In this place, there is no prison. You are not bound by your conditions of living in a prison or even of living in a body. You are in this place of unconditional, unlimited freedom. And you can dwell there, and you can learn to go back there at will as a place of refuge at any time. So this was the practice that we taught. And I have to tell you, it was not easy in that environment. There were constant noises. There were slamming of steel doors clanging outside the room that we were in. There were prisoners and guards interacting and sometimes shouting out near us and out in the courtyards. There was a lot of activity and, frankly, a lot of human suffering all around us. And for the two of us, entering a prison environment and spending a few days in these environments, afterwards, we would feel a real need to kind of just clear ourselves out. I mean, there's so much energy and intensity there. But the soul of the prisoners was the human soul that we encounter in every human being. And doing that work with them was so remarkable. Well, what happened some months later when we went back was that we were approached by these prisoners, and they came and told us how they had been working with this practice and how they had been able to develop this place of inner freedom that they'd never known. They had been actually able, and when one of them was saying, when I go to bed at night, he said, I have nowhere, anywhere where I'm ever alone. But where I can be alone is in my bed. Right when I'm going to sleep and before I get up, I lie in my bed. And there I go into that place within myself and I tap that freedom. And I connect with that unconditional, indestructible essence of who I really am. And I'm out of prison. And there's no guards and there's no other prisoners that are basically confining me. In those moments, I am utterly free. And it was really quite remarkable to hear this and to see how even in this incredibly intense environment of a prison, one can practice this practice of getting out of the city of the mind and into our true nature. So Charles Fillmore has a beautiful way of speaking about this. He says, we can establish a connection between the conscious mind and superconsciousness within us by meditation, by silence, and by speaking the word. He says, as you develop this mind within yourself, you will find that you can gradually turn over more and more of your affairs to its perfect discrimination. Nothing is too great for it to accomplish, nor is anything too trivial for it to handle with perfection and dispatch. This mind of the spirit will guide you in perfect ways, even in the minute details of your life, if you will let it do so. But you must will to do its will and trust it in all your ways. It will lead you unfailingly into health, happiness, and prosperity, as it has done and is doing for thousands, if and when you follow it. So this is really the key. As my teacher said, you must get connected from within. The single most important thing in spiritual life is to go into the very depths of your own being, as deeply inward as you can go, and connect to that eternal self, that eternal reality that dwells within you, that indwelling presence. And this is something that is deeper than thought and requires us to go beyond the mind, beyond the thinking mind. I mean, one could say it's a part of our consciousness, so it's a part of the mind. But how we usually understand mind is that the mind is the thinking instrument. And in most spiritual traditions, there's a lower mind and a higher mind. And we must go actually beyond both into this super consciousness, into this consciousness that is beyond thought. Because thought by its very nature, and we need it, it's valuable, but thought by its very nature divides and separates. It analyzes. And so it partitions the unity. It separates what is oneness into apparent pieces, bite-sized pieces that we can chew and digest. And of course, we need this. It's a necessary function. We need thought. This is not anti-thought. As my friend Ravi Ravindra says, a physicist also, who is obviously steeped in deep thought. And when he gives talks about this, and people say, oh, he's become an anti-intellectual. They used to say this about David Bohm too. Oh, he's gone soft in the mind, because he's centered in the heart now. He's kind of lost his sharp thinking edge. No, not at all. And the way Ravi put it was, when accused of this becoming anti-intellectual, he said, I'm not anti-intellectual. I'm striving for something trans-intellectual. So it's not anti-intellectual. It's simply recognizing that the intellect, the thinking mind, even the higher thinking mind, is not the foundation of our deepest level of being. It's a reflection of it, and it can represent it in certain ways. But there is this part of our essence that is beyond the mind. And we need to connect to that and make that fun. It's what Adyashanti calls the spiritual instinct. It's an instinct like any other instinct. It's in us. It's this high, deep yearning to connect with the source, to be living in direct, fluid, dynamic, one-to-one life stream of spirit to my soul. It's that direct connection that we are striving for here in spiritual practice, that we are aspiring to. And that, as Charles Fillmore says, when we make that connection, it guides us in every little detail of our life, great and small. And as we learn to trust it in small things, as the scripture says, when we have faith in those small things, it then helps us to have faith in those large things and those large challenges of life. And so to do this, we have to free ourselves from the knot of thought, the knot of the heart that says, I am my thoughts. In the Hindu tradition, they have these three knots, the knots of the heart, and there's three types of them. The first one is the one that says, I am my body. And, of course, I'm scratching my eye right now. So this is me. That's my eye. My finger's scratching it. Of course, I'm my body. And you're your body. We can see this. Nothing could be more obvious. I am not you. You are not me. So, of course, I'm my body. And of course, that's not false, but it's not our ultimate identity at all. And it's not our true identity. So that's the first knot. The second knot of the heart is called the one around, I am my feelings. I am happy. I'm sad. I'm depressed. I am elated. Each of these, I am this, I am that, is a relative identification, which is not who we are. And so these are the knots of the heart that spiritual practice unravels. And then they say that the most difficult one is what they call the knot of Shiva, the knot of the heart that says, I am my thoughts. And those constant stream of thoughts that we have, that we feel like that's who we are. And we get identified with them. And then we are run by our thoughts and often chasing after them. This is the kind of rat race of the thought city that we want to learn to exit. And we are trained in our culture to identify with thought. We must not take thought's view of reality for reality itself. We must not take thought to be the ultimately real, and yet we do this by habit. And sadly, even in our so-called higher learning and institutions of higher learning in science, philosophy, and even in theology. So in science, for example, theory is routinely taken as reality itself by all except the most sophisticated scientists who realize this is a fundamental mistake. But scientists are trained and conditioned to accept the most accurate and widely experimentally validated theory to be the reality. And don't ask any further questions. This is the reality. And that's true, for example, in quantum physics, for those of you who have studied quantum physics and the different interpretations of quantum physics. And the votaries of a particular interpretation hold it. This is how it actually is, not recognizing it is a representation in thought of reality. So this is a very subtle deception that it's easy to fall into. And even the best scientific theory remains ultimately inadequate compared to the real. It may be a model of reality and as a theory, but it's not reality. As the great Sufi master Radha Mohan Lal of India said, he was the sheikh of Irina Tweedy. And he said, what can be understood by the mind is not a high state of consciousness. Now, why is this? What is he referring to? The reason for this is that beyond the separating faculty of the mind, which again, we're not dissing it, it's very important. It gives us that incisive capacity to analyze and to penetrate with analytic thought. But beyond that capacity lies the unity of the light, or what's in Sanskrit called the Buddhi, which is the root of Buddhism. Buddhi means spiritual perception. It is the capacity of the heart to perceive the inherent oneness of all things. And so we must move through the mind to this place of the perception of the light. And as the great Hermes said, the thrice great Hermes of Hermetic philosophy, he said, I would that thou hadst passed even right through thyself. So he's speaking to the fact that we have this sense of needing to go right through the very essence of ourself, because ourself is this kind of thought identified structure and we need to go beyond it. And we cannot do this by thought alone. Thought alone cannot lead us to the place beyond thought. We have to contact something different or higher. Now, according to one of my great mentors, who I never met, but whose books I have read deeply and deeply appreciated, Sri Krishna Prem, he was an Englishman who went to India in the 20s and lived the rest of his life there. And he basically, the way he puts it, which I feel is just an articulation of what we all the religions are constantly teaching, but he puts it in a very particular way. He says, there is one force that is capable of taking a human being through the bottleneck of selfhood into the wide extended regions beyond. And this is the force of love, or bhakti. Love is the one force in the universe which is capable of driving out all thought of self. And it is on the wings of self-giving that the further reaches of the spiritual path must be followed up. And so he continues and basically says the preliminary step is to discriminate between our thoughts and ways of thinking, which make up the pattern of the mental self, and the thinker of those thoughts. So we must distinguish between thoughts and the one who thinks them. The thinker, the one who thinks the thoughts, is the light which holds thought in place and on whose waves those thoughts float. And so one then discovers that light. One discovers that that light is a universal light. It is the same and equal in all beings. So that light is no more me than it is you. It is one light in both of us. And this is why Jesus said so beautifully, I am the light of the world. You are the light of the world. We are all that one light. And the power, the capacity that we have within us to take us to that realization is the power of love, which can take us right through even the higher mind into this realization of that one supreme light, what is called Buddhi in Sanskrit. And from the point of view of that light, the self to which we have so kind of fondly clung is revealed to be nothing other than an interconnected set of thought data. This idea of I am this and that, and I basically give you an articulation of all the ways that I think and the views that I hold and the opinions that I have and the experiences that I've had. That whole complex is simply seen from that light as a collection, maybe organized, maybe disorganized, of thought data. But it's not who I am. I am this shining beam of spiritual light, taking myself to be this collection of thoughts that have been amalgamated into a particular structure. So for all the extravagant value that we have set upon a thought, it is really a kind of obstruction in the free flow of this light. This light is the one true life, which is why Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He never said, I am the thought of the world. And again, we're not anti-thought here. Remember, it's trans-intellectual that we're reaching for. So Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And if we're to speak of selfhood, it is in that light that true selfhood arises. And it is to that light that we must transfer our identity, our true being. And in that way, we separate out the light of self that was entangled in the knot of mind and unite it with, or dissolve it into, the all-pervading light of spirit. So now, how do we do this? How can we accomplish this in practice? So this is where this one light, this one power, the power of love, has the capacity to take us there. And as Jesus said, I am the light of the world, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says it differently, but the same thing. Krishna says, the same am I in all beings. And then he adds, those who serve me with devotion, I manifest myself in them, and they unite their being with me. So this is the key. Those who serve me with devotion, I manifest myself in them, and they unite their being with me. This is why Jesus emphasized that the first commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and spirit. It's not so that you can be a good little boy or a good little girl and obey the rules. It's because this is the clearest and strongest pathway for Christ to manifest in you and for you to unite your being with Christ. And so in that way, you can actually practice walking as Christ in the world, not as an arrogant, pompous, puffing yourself up, but simply as the living reality. As Teresa of Avila said, Christ has no body now on earth but yours, no mouth, no feet, no hands now but yours with which to do his work in the world. So you are the walking, living instrument. It's not a statement of arrogance to say, to aspire to be the Christ walking into the world and doing that work now, if it's done from this place of the connection to the deepest source of who you are. So as Ramana Maharshi summarizes this process with what happens, and then we'll finish with a practice here that you can take this week. But the great spiritual sage of India, Ramana Maharshi, talks about this whole process of giving yourself to love and what happens to the sense of I, the sense of identity. And he says, in the case of divine love, I approach God with the practice of divine love. I approach God and I pray to be absorbed in God. I'm offering myself to God. Because I love God, I am offering myself in this sense of, as Jesus said, no one has greater love than this, than lay down his life for the one he loves. So we are basically offering our life to God. I offer myself, I surrender myself, not as an act of weakness or defeat, but as an act of recognition that this supreme being that we call God is in me, and I want to be fully united with it. So I give myself fully to this, which is ultimately a mystery, but it is a mystery that can be known, and prayer is our connection, and service is our action that unites us. Because in that devotion, as Krishna says, I am united with that being of the universal Christ. So I surrender myself in faith and by concentration. And then what happens afterwards? And here's what Ramana Maharshi says, really beautiful. He says, in place of the original I, perfect self-surrender leaves a residuum of God in which the I is lost. This is the highest form of devotion or surrender. The I casts off the illusion of I and yet remains as I. Such is the paradox of spiritual realization, and the realized do not see any contradiction in it. The I casts off the illusion of I and yet remains as I. This is the same mystery that Paul writes of when he says, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. It's that replacement of the false identification of the I with our thought constructed self and mental conception of who we are. All of that is transmuted and released. And that is the I that is lost. And yet there is still an I, or you could even say it is the I am. So the I is replaced by the I am as we walk in humility with Christ, not in spiritual, megalomania, but in true humility. And then we are a living instrument of Christ. So to give you a practice for this week, I just want to invite you to practice this witnessing of your emotions and your feelings and your body sensations. And then in particular, to practice witnessing your thoughts, to practice the thoughts running by you, but not running after them, not joining them in the race. And allow that constant flow of thought to just be there, as it always is anyway. And let the thoughts move through you. But here's the key: don't identify with your thoughts. Just observe them. And it's very much like being in a movie theater. And the smash hit film for this week is your thoughts. So there you're sitting in the movie theater and there it is across the screen. This is your thoughts. This is you. And all those thoughts you're going to watch. And you'll find, of course, a lot of them are actually very boring. Hopefully you'll have a good movie. But you know how it is. The thoughts get in patterns. It's like, God, why does this movie keep repeating the same scene again and again and again? But whatever it is, you're sitting in that theater and you're watching those thoughts. But here's the key. You don't climb up on the stage and then try to get inside and merge yourself, impale yourself on the screen and become those images, which is what we actually do. Now, if you actually saw someone at a movie theater actually doing that, you would say, well, this is an obvious case of insanity. Yet, in fact, we all do this with our thoughts. We project ourselves inside our thoughts, identify with them, and then pretend that our thoughts are who we are. And then we forget that we pretended this. That's the key. We pretend that we are our thoughts. Then we forget that we pretended this, and then we lose awareness of this deeper reality of who we actually are. And this is the trap. And so the key here is to watch your thoughts and to simply witness them and to stay present as that light, as that one light. And that then as you step out into your life and into your street, into the street and into your workday, as well as in your own home with your loved ones, or whatever context you're in, take the thought that I am the Christ, not the Christ, but I am this instrument of Christ. I am this instrument of Jesus. Or if you want, you can take that Jesus is right beside you. Either one will work. But the idea is that you are this living instrument of the universal Christ consciousness. That is who you are, actually. That's who we actually are. And so to practice that, and then to allow the thoughts that come in this incessant stream, to simply witness them, watch them arise. And if you get very precise about this, you'll notice that a thought has a birth, it comes up, it has an intensity, it has a living life, and then it eventually dies and goes away. And as it is said by one of the great masters, when asked what is the essence of true spiritual practice, and the response was, have you ever noticed that between one thought and the next thought there is a gap? And the student said yes. And then the master said, prolong the gap. The idea being to bring your awareness to the process of thought in such a way that you can actually witness the beginning of each thought, the ending of each thought, the gap between the thoughts. And to do that, you are developing this capacity to witness your thoughts, like in that movie theater, without collapsing into identification with them. So I invite you into that practice this week, because that gap between the thoughts is where that deep spiritual instinct, that true universal Christ consciousness lives and can be contacted. And then eventually can actually infuse all of your thoughts with itself. So your very thoughts will be transformed by connecting to the deepest root of your own soul. So practice that this week. And may you always remember that it's really true what Teresa of Avila said. Christ, Krishna, Buddha, they have no body now on earth but yours and mine, to do their profound work, to be the instruments of their love, their compassion. So let us practice and aspire to become them in our own way while remaining in the center of our humility. Amen.